a try on that left-hand side. What happened?
Oh, but I've gone up and over and bloody head over biscuit. It wasn't enough stability there for myself, but no, I was busting for a bit of meat this game. It didn't seem to work out.
Hello, cheers, and welcome to the Scrum of the Earth podcast, the weekly show for news, reviews, great interviews, and so much more, all about the world of rugby. My name is David Lawrence. I'm an American rugby fan who follows the game wherever I can find it all over the globe. If you'd like to get in touch, well, I'm easy to find on all your socials, and you can always just drop an email to thescrumoftheearth@gmail.com. Well, as you have no doubt deduced, this is not your regular weekly episode, but it is in fact yet another bonus episode. This time I am thrilled I say, to announce the return of the one and only Alice Soper. Alice is one of my favorite rugby pundits on earth. She's a coach, an advocate, a content creator, and if you're not already subscribing to her newsletter, Alice's Soapbox, I can't recommend it highly enough. Alice, kia ora, welcome back. It's so good to see you. How the heck are you?
Oh, kia ora, David. Look at that. This is a flash now, mate. I'm taking notes over here.
Yep, I found another way to do things for free.
Yeah, right on. That's what I say. Making notes. Always good to know what different people are using. But no, doing well, thank you. It's been
it's getting close to summer there, right?
Last couple of weeks. Yeah, it is. It's beautiful, and all the news is dropping for women's sports. It's been this last fortnight. There's actually been more than I can process, so I'm kind of on a catch up.
Really? What do you mean? What's been happening? By the way, the news the news feed you get is not similar to my own. In anticipation of this chat, I was like, I should probably look up some New Zealand news, and the first thing I found was Sir Peter Jackson has demolished one of his beach houses. And I'm like,
oh
what?
yeah, look. Here's the thing about Sir Peter Jackson. He's one reputation internationally and one reputation locally. People have found him. He was a union buster. Boo. There is still
was he?
Decades later. Yeah, after the first Lord of the Rings films were filmed here, he really disenfranchised actors, New Zealand actors, and their rights on working. So we're not a big fan. He also helped a Conservative get elected as mayor here in my hometown. So Peter Jackson,
Dang.
boo. Sorry to hear about your beach house, bro, but I'm not that sad. What's been going on in the world of women's rugby here? Obviously, we had the ticket application process open up for the World Cup, but we also had the rugby picky squads drop. And the same week, we also got some participation data for this year's kind of update. But that last piece was okay, I don't want your press release. I want the updated data that you gave me last year, because someone was kind enough at New Zealand Rugby to send me a 10-year globe, a nationwide breakdown. So I was I want that updated, please. So I've got that in the inbox, but I haven't been able to dig right into it yet.
Well, it feels like it was ages ago, but the FPC wrapped up. I'm a huge fan of this competition. Waikato, they edged out perennial contenders Canterbury 27-25 in Hamilton. It was a great final on a beautiful day. What were your thoughts and takeaways from that game?
It's become a classic of recent years to have Waikato and Canterbury playing each other. I think was surprising though that Canterbury made it in, because Counties Monaco had been in form. They're called the Heat, and that's what they brought all season. So they, I think made the mistake of having scored twice, before the 75th minute. They were sweet, we've locked this one up. You can never write off a Canterbury team in the dying minutes, and so they pipped them to sneak in. And it was interesting, the parallels between both the Premiership and Championship, right? Because both of those semi-finals played out in similar ways to then the final did, and that the top of the table was an easier walk through to the playoff, and their rival kicked off an upset. So in the Championship, that was Otago getting up over Wellington to Manawatu, and then in the Premiership, that was Canterbury getting up over Counties Monaco to play Waikato. It was a decider though in the Premiership, because they have met now 3 times in recent years to play that. And the edge, look, it was obvious early on that you're going to start in Waikato because they had James Semple back as their head coach, and I made the joke at the time that there's one Waikato team that plays, and then there's a completely different one when they have James Semple in their corner, so able to grind it out and get there. Yeah, but big ups to Canterbury. Had a lot of change up, and I think what their performance in this year's Wharapama Cup gave is just like they quite obviously best provincial program in the country. I mean, I think they continue to be.
I love Waikato, the men's and the women's. The fans are great. The atmosphere is great. The stadium is great. Everything about it I love.
Well, you will also then love, David, that they've got a documentary coming out, I think, in the next couple of days. I just got an invite. Yeah, I just got an invite from Simon. Bless Simon, the one chief executive of the Super Rugby franchise that subscribes to my newsletter. So thank you, Simon. They have put one together on the Chiefs rather than Waikato, but it's a 3-part series that's being released with TVNZ here, who's our national broadcaster. So I guess the hope is that then ends up on YouTube. Have put things up on those platforms before, so hope that that's the case for people like you to be able to plug in. It is just focused on their men's team, but it's looking cool. Would love to see more of those type of textural details. Give me the feeling of it all,
So I think I now am at a level of comprehension, but please spell it out for us. What is the women's pathway in New Zealand right now? You try to make the FPC, and then you springboard to the Opiki, and that's your doorway into the Black Ferns. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah. So the you're playing your clubs, and so and this is still the I guess unique features. And I wonder for how many more seasons this will exist. That everyone ends up at the club at the beginning of each year. So we have a club season, which you then hopefully are picked up for your local province, and then from there hopefully perform well enough to get an Opiki gig and a shot at the Black Ferns. The only side step that obviously is if we still have our relationship with our sevens team, so that there can be the alternate pathway, which is I guess you have these days it's generally identified out of high school for sevens. There's a big national high school tournament called the Condors, and that plays every year. So you're generally identified out of that, and then that's where you might get a development contract with the Black Ferns, and then hopefully make it into the sevens team proper. But you are brought in and centralized quite quickly when it comes to sevens, and then that might give you the opportunity to bounce between. So we do see that with players like Tenaka Willison, Jamie Colosi, who will both be playing in Opiki this year, but who are on those kind of wider Black Fern contracts.
I swear, I had a whole section in my script about, wait, the relationship between the sevens and the 15s, is this good, is this bad? And I ditched it because I was like, we're not going to have time, and now you just teed it up for me. Do those programs serve each other? If you're in the sevens, is it good for you in your 15s future, and vice versa? Is it working well?
Look, I think it's the Band-Aid they've applied at the moment while they're not really developing enough domestically for our 15s players. I think and I've written about this at length, but I think the issue that we have is we don't give enough game time to players in New Zealand. So, if you are playing Wharapama Cup, that's a tournament that's at most, if you make all of the playoffs and the final, 8 weeks. That's 8 games long. And when it comes to Super Rugby Opiki, it's only going to be 6 weeks, so 6 games again this year. So with that, are you really getting good off 6 weeks? That you have a real also welfare issue there, because little niggles people are more inclined to hide, because a little takes you out for the whole tournament.
Wow, hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that we haven't got that gearing right, and I would just love us to be playing more, because I think while we're not, it then does make it easier for sevens players to come into the 15s program, because they are full-time professional athletes, versus even if you are a professional 15s player in New Zealand, you're not actually getting that many games.
Well, you actually you kind of teed it up. You mentioned it in the newsletter. You talked about the FPC. If you were going to make some tweaks to make this competition better, What are you going to do to fix the FPC? By the way, as a fan, all the way on the other side of the world, I love it. I like watching, but it became. I think I was writing back and forth with you. Like it's convoluted at the end. I think the webmaster might be asleep, but then again, why should they have a full-time job with that person anyway? What needs to happen with the FPC?
Yeah, I think that's interesting about the Farah Palmer Cup, right? And this is all part of like a bigger conversation that's going on in rugby in general, into domestic competitions. Like there's a real navel gazing that's going on for the men in the game, and that like basically the 30-year experiment of professionalism here has come up with, we just cannot afford to sustain a 2-tier professional league, which is actually what in the men's game, their version of the FPC is the NPC, so the National Provincial Championship. So they have that, and then Super, right? We replicated that model while knowing that it has stopped working for men. So I have a whole other thing that, like, had we started like actually from scratch, I don't think you ever would have bothered with Super Rugby Opiki. I think you would have been better to draw inspiration from the UK model and look at, I think, putting into the Farah Palmer Cup and developing that better. We're not at that stage now. We've gone ahead with this. So in order to make the Farah Palmer Cup work, I think it's to really understand that it's just going to be about getting those regular games at the proper level of competition. We have the same challenge in the Farah Palmer Cup that you see frequently across the rugby world, where you're actually trying to fit essentially what is like 3 different tiers of rugby into a 2-tier split. So we have, the Premiership, which is operating at one level, and the maybe top 2, 3, 4 teams in the Premiership are at one level. And then you've kind of got the people that are at the bottom of that competition ladder, who then are having their own competition to avoid relegation down to Championship. And what happens every year in Championship, and I'm so sick of like the casual observer writing about it, because they're always shocked every year that there's one team that will end up just killing everyone in the championships. That's just what happens. They then come up and they then are fighting for their lives to stay up, like that's to do with the 3-tier of it all. So what I would love to see is a bring back to what we actually had pre-COVID times, which is when we used to have crossover matches. It extended the length of the tournament, so it gave us, rather than a guaranteed 6, it was a guaranteed 8 games. But I would love us to be a lot more intentional around who it is, where like the brackets in which we're overlapping with. So to my mind, that's 5th, 6th, 7th in Premiership, playing 1st, 2nd, 3rd in Championship, and doing that crossover there. I think there's then also a opportunity to be reaching down below Championship. There is an emerging and developing heartland competition for women in rugby,
right? Which is like the kind of somehow Flow Rugby, which I call Blow Rugby, actually gave us some heartland games this year, and I was like, oh, I've heard about this, and I'm going to watch, and then they were gone. It was like 1 week, and that was it. That's so weird.
I mean, to be fair, Heartland, the men's competition, is kind of broadcast how like our provincial competition used to be, and that they get their season, and there's a couple of asterisks, and those are the games you get to play on TV. So they're not advising every week. It's just like a couple of games. But like that Heartland scene, that's actually really important as well, in terms of there is so many of our players that end up in our national team who will tell you originally, they're like Luca Connor, who's from Portuguese, or Amy Duplessis, who's from down south. And, we were lucky that these people moved to the provinces in order to play. But, if we have Heartland there, then you have teams like the East Coast, you have teams like Poverty Bay, you have teams like Southland and, South Canterbury that are also getting to play, and giving those players opportunities. So I think you could then have a crossover with the top teams that are performing in Heartland with Championship, to also make them have to fight to stay in the Championship. Because look, Taranaki's in there. They've been getting kicked by everyone for the last couple of seasons. It would be interesting to see if another team who is really putting their effort into their Heartland team can get in there. And then that also gives a pathway in for a province like Southland, who keeps knocking on the door, who has more registered players than Tasman Tasman, then Hawke's Bay, then Manawatu, but doesn't get to have a place in the Wharapama Cup. So I think you have crossovers between Prems and Championship. I think you have crossovers between Championship, Heartland. I think you have relegation matches played between all three. And then I think the real wild card for me, which is now I'm like wishing for everything, is if we actually start being better neighbours to our sisters in the Pacific. And I think that's where we can start to offer our top tier of premiership the opportunity to play friendly games against Samoa, against Tonga, against Papua New Guinea, Fiji.
That's great.
Like, we have so many of these players that are based here in our system, and I think we've got this real it's the men's mindset, right? Where we're like trying to like hold on really to what talent is. We have more talent than we have black jerseys. And so if we had our neighbors playing better, that's good. Like push up the competition.
Right.
For everything. I just think it's such a short worldview at everything. I think we should be supporting Samoa to get stronger. Like that's going to make us better. They're playing in our domestic scene. If they're getting more quality game, they're going to lift all of us up, you know?
It seems like the obvious question is, why aren't you in charge of this all by now?
Oh, look, I have had a conversation because a couple of my friends have gone recently and are working within their unions, which is really interesting, right? And so I'm watching carefully as to how it goes. You know, the most obvious example of that is like Lynn Cantwell, right? Who's just signed for Irish Rugby. Now that's a big thing for her to go inside the tent, because she has been very strong in her advocacy against certain decisions that have been made in the past. So it'll be really interesting to see how she fits in there, right? And I think the reality is I'm not done changing New Zealand rugby system enough yet to be able to be received in there. Like I think things are straightforward, but I'm dealing with a mindset that just really can't see that type of vision yet. So I think we have to build up those capabilities and people accountable at this stage to then be able to be a place that can actually receive it. Like I just don't know if conservative worldview that I like nationally would actually, I wouldn't last 5 minutes, mate, you know. first meeting you're out. Like this is
We're not listening to her anymore.
No.
Speaking of the OPK, there's been a bit of news recently that reverberated all the way over here with the announcement of Portia Woodman-Whitcliffe signing with the Blues for the coming season. I'll just tell you, she's one of my favorite players of all time. Can you talk about a bit about her career? How excited are you to see her carving it up again this season? Well, next year, I guess it'll be March, I think.
Yeah, look, she's an interesting one because, you know, she was very much at pains and we had that conversation when we had her black jersey retirement. You know, she was at pains to say at that time, my black jersey career is over. I'm not going to be doing, you know, she made the joke, I'm not going to be doing what my wife did that said, I'm retired, and then kept coming back. So she knew, you know, like, I want to be a nanny playing for, Northland, who's her home province. She was like, as long as they have me. So for her to be picked up and playing in OPK is not necessarily entirely unsurprising. It's surprising that she's ended up at the Blues. Because obviously she played in 2022, she played in that inaugural team that won the Chiefs Manawa. She played with them and won that championship there. So going to the Blues is interesting. Going to the Blues, given the personnel they have there, is also really interesting because I'm not entirely sure where she'll play. I mean, if you look at, obviously she's a winger, right? But you've got Caitlin Vahakolo, Jamie Kolosi, Patricia Maliapo, who are all confident in those back three. Also got young talent.
It didn't seem like the Blues needed. Didn't seem like the Blues needed help, but here it is.
No, like didn't seem like they needed help, but also didn't seem like they had a gap to fill. Like if you looked at roster in terms of like year on year, the one that was maybe like the question mark was that Niall Guthrie isn't back for them, and she was massive for them in the loose forwards last year. So it's like, well, Portia's not going to play loose forward, surely. I don't think. I mean, I predicted that Niall would, but I just don't necessarily see that Portia will. So then Portia, what is she going to play? Are they then going to also, they've got a very confident inside pairing, which has worked for them, that won a championship last year. That was Kristen Cottrell at 10, Roahei Demont at 12, and then Sylvia Bont at 13. Now, so Portia has played 13 before. She played it for Northland most recently. Displace Sylvia Brunt though? Or do you end up pushing them all in and then benching Kristen Cottrell, who is one like a phenomenal form for the Blues? So I just don't know where the heck they're going to put her. Like, amazing they have her, but where will she play?
There needs an extra position just called ass kicker, and that'll be her.
Just plug her in. I mean, she keeps making the joke, and I'm like, who am I saying this to? Oh, lovely Steph Teohari Fox, who's I was teasing her. I said, "Are you going to pop back?" She was retired as well. Played used to be front for New Zealand and played with Matatu, but turned up at the last minute for the Blues last year as well. And we were saying, man, we have to have more respect on our position, right? Because had been making the joke. She's like, "Oh, I'll play even in the front row if I have to." And it's like, sis, I love you, but you couldn't. Like, this is, I was saying to Steph, you need to start saying in press conferences, "Hey, look, I'll play anywhere. Put me on the wing if you need to. You know, give some respect to our front rowers, please."
Well, it's amazing to me that the OPK is only will be entering its fourth season. It feels like there's a ton of history between these clubs. Like, what were things like before OPK?
Yeah, and I think that's where you like. It's interesting because there are like carryover rivalries that are anchored in provincial stuff, right?
It seems like there's a history there that I'm just not aware of.
Yeah, so like, you know, the classic, and then I would also say that history has changed because back in the day, everyone hated Auckland because when we're talking provincial things, like from I think like 99, which is when New Zealand Rugby took over the provincial competition here, from like 99 till like 2006, Auckland won every year. 2006 is when we beat them, Wellington, and then they just won again for like another 10 years. So they like were it, right? So it used to be that everybody hated Auckland, but I would say more modern day, which seems crazy for me to say modern day because I'm like, I'm not that old, but I remember that. But I would say players that have maybe picked up the game in the last 5 years, that type of general distaste now is for Canterbury, which like, there's probably nothing for that except for that like very good names. Everybody's like stuff Canterbury, you know? In the same way that everyone...
They're always good. That's a good thing to root against if you're not them, right?
Yeah, so I think people have that feeling for Canterbury, and so then that carries across to poor old Matatu, right? Like because they're based out of the Canterbury facilities, everyone's like has that feeling and you know loves getting up over them. It's interesting though, like the in the same way
they share a facility. They're like in the same place, training at the same place.
Yeah, so like Matatu being, you know, they are the whole South Island franchise, but they are essentially based out of Canterbury, based out of Christchurch, out of their facilities. There's a lot of crossover between them, and what you will also see, right, like is the stronger your local feeder, the higher the retention is as well, right? Like, so we've seen that like definitely impact the squad that like the Chiefs Manawa have so far announced. They still have 3 players, like 3 spots in their roster to fill, but you can see the very heavy Waikato influence, which makes sense, right? Like Waikato just run the Wharapama Cup, so there's a core of players now that have like come through there. Yeah, and whereas Blues, they've always been pretty like that core is very much built around that legacy, which is the Auckland Storm. So, you know, you have each of these. And the interesting thing I think out of the Hurricanes POA is that my home region of Wellington has been underperforming now for at least a decade.
It's my next question for sure.
Yeah, and there's like a lot of reasons for that. But what's interesting about it is there has been, while Wellington has been underperforming, Manawatu and Hawke's Bay have really started to turn things around. Yeah. And so now also seeing that reflected in terms of those selections that come through. So, yeah, it's very much, you know, like we're pulling from the provinces. These feeders should be part of it. So the stronger your province is, the stronger your franchise team is too.
Well, you just mentioned the Chiefs Manawa. They've been so consistent. They've been there or thereabouts the whole time. I think they won the first. There was no final actually played, but they won based on table position, and they've been in the last 2 finals. Matatu, they won in 2023, but they had a rough season last time, and it's even tougher for your Hurricanes. They were second in that inaugural year, but they managed only one win last season. Like, what's the difference between these teams that can find consistency and other teams that don't? Or maybe I'm just making too many assumptions based on this small sample size.
I mean, there's definitely that, right? But I think the interesting thing to look at is one part around retention rates. So how much of your squad are you holding on to year, but then also percentage of your Black Ferns experience that you have in these teams too, right? So what's interesting, like the Blues, their first season where they were they weren't in there. I think I don't think they finished last, they were third. So they went third, fourth, and then one, right? Like that was their journey. And what's interesting about that is you saw year one had under 40% of retention rate of their players. There was a huge bleed out of the Blues after that first season. Then the second year, that retention rate jumped right up to like over 60%. And then the following season, that was closer to 70. So like as they've managed to hold on to that core, right? Like we're talking short seasons. So if you are having more of your core together, you can start to build that continuity and pick up where you left off.
That's whereas if you look at the consistency over the years, right? The time, it's just time invested, right?
Yes, and so if you compare that with, say, my beleaguered Hurricanes POA, we've had around 50% turnover every year. So if you're having that, you're going to have struggles. And also, not only have we had those turnovers, we've also had them in key positions. So we're not like we've had a different first five every year. So like that type of thing, if your pivot is a different player every year, that's going to impact the style of play that you have. But then also now, David, with the impact of professionalism, which really only exists for those contracted Black Ferns, the fact that such a majority of those current contracted players are playing out of Matatu and are playing out of the Blues, that does end up having, an impact, whereas the POA have the lowest current contracted players. Really? So that means you've basically got like a more amateur side that's playing against, established teams. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like this is always a competition that's going to be stacked, and there's teams that are going to be having a huge advantage. And as a fan, I like it anyway. As a fan, like I always pick an underdog, so that makes me root more for my team. But is that good for the competition? Does something need to change in the FPC?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's an interesting one, right? Like I don't know. Again, like I've said to you, I've given you that pitch around how I would shake things up within Wharapama to get those more crucial games, like more high quality crucial games. I would say like there is definitely some elements of this too, where I'm like, are we looking at the overall health distribution? Because I really don't know, if you look at the Moa team, for example, if you look at their team for this year, how many of the, prospective Black Ferns front row there are in that one franchise in a tournament that's 6 games long? Is that actually going to be the best thing? And would it not have been better to have a couple of those players transfer into the POA so that they're actually getting to play? I just think that there's we've seen this, some players who are making those moves. So like Atlanta Lola here, who had on the bench behind Georgia Ponsonby, both in the Black Ferns, but also in Matatu, who is now this season playing out of the Blues. That makes complete sense, mate. Should, so that you actually get the game time. But I just don't know if we necessarily it's that overarching view. It's like who's actually at this moment, it seems like it's franchise by franchise that are running these contracting decisions. And I just think that that's wrong when we're in a still very much a development stage of this. You also look at like how wide the net is that we've cast. I talked about those churns between different teams. Well, we've had around 222 players feature in squad list over this 4-year period. That's a really high number.
That's a really high number.
For what is essentially, what is it? It's like 100, around 120 players per season, that we're still having that quite high churn in and out of there. And that there is actually, I think, only just over 40 players that have actually played all 4 years. Like that's
wow.
That's speaking
shocking.
to like are we doing the talent ID piece well enough? And not just talent ID, I guess, like talent distribution. And I just think it's one thing to win championships, but what this really should be doing is about winning World Cups. And I just don't know if that piece really unlocks for us yet.
Well, we'll get to that. So recently, we also wrapped up the second iteration of the WXV, which had some incredible rugby, along with some huge upsets. Last time we spoke, you said that winning the World Cup might have actually been bad for New Zealand because it effectively gave everyone a pass. Like it said, okay, it maybe sent the message like, hey, nothing's wrong. There's no work-ons. We don't have to worry about this. Everything's fine. After losing to Ireland in the WXV, are people coming around to your viewpoint now? Like, what's wrong with the Black Ferns and what should they be doing about it?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because like there's two. Yeah, they wake to it kind of like I don't know if there's still enough like energy, like I say, to be really focusing on the pathway that has to be backing up these performances. Because if you've got a rickety pathway, you're going to have shaky performances, which is what we see, outside of World Cup years. The game against Ireland, though, like I can't help but feel like if we'd had a woman coach that has come from the women's community in that box, that wouldn't have happened. Because I can tell you, like, our women's rugby community all remember 2014. Obviously, we did exactly what we did during WXV, which was not pay Ireland the respect of what they are capable of, named a team that was not able to necessarily deliver. And then, oh my God, so surprised that this happens. It's like, you can't doing people the disrespect of that, like, and then also expect that to translate to results. But then I think that there's an element there, which is like, I think we have continued to see our Black Ferns coaching setup treat the WXV as its development space and not really be targeting there, because I can't think that they are when that's the approach that they've taken to naming a team like that against Ireland. Like, it's not necessarily their starting lineup, but it was the fact that they had so much, and I mean this with respect to these players, but like a lot of desperation on the bench, which is like, these are a number of players who are good, but who really haven't got to play a lot this year. Which changes the mindset when you come on. You're playing a desperate type of rugby rather than a confident style, and that's what we play out there. There was like a real clawing that went on rather than an assuredness. So I think, there's just like some elements of that in terms of the mental game of it all. And I just wonder about, like, I still think our rugby at wide is so insular. Like, it's wild to me how infrequently people are looking at what is happening in other parts of the women's game around the world. And
Interesting.
You see this game against Ireland and you see it based off score sheets. It's like, but being paying attention to the way in which they've been building, because those things, that's why when I'm talking to people about
the difference between Ireland 16 months ago and now and that day, like it's remarkable what their program has done. But you think this was an avoidable result based on coaching decisions?
I think so, yeah. Because I also think, like, one of the things that has been really frustrating me is pace off the base. Like, how quick are we getting that ball off the ground? Because we are a team, like, and everybody knows this, right? Like, we're a team that is working best in broken play because of the style that we play. So we need to be running up against defensive lines that are not well set. And how do you do that? That's pace off the base. That's really getting that ball out. If you look at, like, stats out of WXV, it was only in that last game against France that suddenly the ruck speed is dropping below 3 seconds, so they're like, we had, it was around 50% for all of the other games, but when we play France, it's 63% of our rucks are less than 3 seconds. So we need that pace, that is a classic of our game. And please don't slow us down, because if you're putting a handbrake on us, like, it feels in a weird way, David, like it's like a throwback to early 2000 men's rugby, when this debate used to go on between the way that, like, Justin Marshall would play off the base versus players like, Greg Callagher, who that man is a complicated mess, and we're not going to go into that. But just for the purpose of his playing style, that was a real,
I mean,
debate.
even now people are talking about Richie Mwanga and how much Scott Robertson
Yeah.
is missing him and his pace and that zip.
Yeah, and that's it's what we need. And so we tend to be, I think we're playing, this is why for my mind, Iritana Tohaya is still my preferred number 9. Just the quicker pace that I think works better for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I would say to you, David, like, it's interesting, right, because the whole Ireland thing, I think those in the Northern Hemisphere could maybe have seen that coming in the same way that I was explaining to people, I'm writing Australia off for having lost to Wales in the lead up to that tournament. I'd been watching them play their rugby all year, and yeah, they might not have had the score, but they had the moments and the passages of play. They just needed to string more of them up together, and they did that in WXV2. So, like, what's the difference there? It's just the time it's taken to click together. And so, they had that time, and so then they had the click. So I wasn't necessarily that surprised.
I'm sure you will well remember that it was like about a year before that result that Ireland, their team they were posting pictures on Instagram of the rats outside the dumpsters in their, quote, changing rooms, unquote, which were not changing rooms. So it was outside in the back next to the dumpsters. And the IRFU was like, stop posting those pictures. And that's where we were. And then they were beating New Zealand a year later. If I was Irish, I'd be pretty excited for that program.
100%. And having Lynn now is very exciting, I think. Having Lynn Cantwell, who I see as one of the most intelligent, like a thought leader in our game. So to have her be able to take the reins of that strategy, like, it is the opportunity to really open that up. But it is interesting, right? Because you say that, and then isn't it like completely unsurprising to now understand what's going on in Welsh rugby, where, like, it hadn't really made sense, like the picture we had painted to the results that were happening on the field. But now we see what was going on behind the scenes, and it's like, oh, but of course, if your coach is leaning on you to sign contracts, you're not going to play your best rugby for that, mate. So
the best people I know were saying something's up right now. Like the Welsh performance in the WXV, something was wrong. Everyone said something's wrong. They were right. Something was very, very wrong. It's disgusting.
Yeah, the vibes are definitely off. But what I would say to people is, like, I don't think that that's a culture issue for us here right now. I think we have a structural issue being that the Black Ferns is operating as a development space and an elite space at the same time. That's our struggle, because we have so few contracts to hand out. We are being strategic, like the coaching is strategic in how they use them, right? But the problem with that is, like, we are pulling people into the most high profile and visible part of our game to do their learning, and that works or it doesn't, and it looks like what it looks like. That's what WXV looks like we're learning, and I would love us to be able to be doing that learning in a proper domestic environment. But while we don't have that, we have to go and humble ourselves in front of everyone else.
So there's a lot of New Zealand players who are retiring now. A lot of the people that I sort of, think of when I think of New Zealand women's rugby, they're leaving, they're going away, they're going to Japan, or they're retiring. I mean, is that part of the problem too? Is it just we're waiting to see who the new people are? Is it just a transition that naturally happens? It feels like there's always a lot of pressure on New Zealand rugby because they have to be the best, and it seems like the same for the men and the women. Are they not allowed to have a transition period?
I mean, look, there's probably elements of that, but I think to me, it's more like it's the same thing that's replicated in my local community on the global stage, and that, like, my local province made choices about 10 years ago has impacted who the playing base is now, what the depth is in certain positions, what our challenges are, what our overall participation number is. We're having to undo problems that were actually created 10 years ago. And we've got the same thing that's happening in our Black Ferns environment, right? Which is that we have a lesson of 2014. So we have continued to basically roll out the same thing, which is making people play a limited number of games. Meanwhile, the world has massively moved on. Not just other programs, right? But in terms of other opportunities for women who show, prowess in sports. The hollowing out that is happening at a domestic level by people picking people up and taking them into the rugby league scene. Like, I'm less concerned about 2025 than I am about 2026. I don't know what happens on the other side of this World Cup, because I don't know if what we're putting together is attractive enough to hold off what's happening, next door.
Sorry, I just had a little spill there. Like, oh, dang. The problem with trying to have a beer. Anyway, by the way, so several of my rugby friends and fellow podcasters are also huge fans of yours. And I reached out to a couple and I said, so, any questions while I've got Alice? Do you want anything? Hugh actually said he had a request to ask about Samoa, the women's program there. Cassie Sayataga, she was the top point scorer in all three tiers of the WXV this year. What's up with the state of Samoa and that program right now?
Yeah, so Samoa, they're very much in a build program, right? Because obviously, again, 10 years ago, I think it was, that they were last at the World Cup. And got to be real with you, that experience for a number of players that were involved was not less than ideal. I had friends of mine that were paying off debt for a long time. So it wasn't just that, it was like, that infrastructure around. The people that are in there that are now running that environment are solid. I have a lot of faith in their coaching and their management team. They are just able to hold up a picture though, right? Like, I think if you think about a team like Samoa, they are the example of like why WXV is so great, because you had a team like Samoa that was lucky to maybe play 5 tests in 4 years previous to, and then now that there is WXV, they're getting to play annual competitions, and it puts on Oceania Rugby to make sure that that championship tournament happens, because it is now part of a path, right? So like all that is an impact. When you're thinking about the players though, like Samoan players have always been here. You think about some of the most iconic New Zealand players, Fia'o Fa'omasili, who captained New Zealand for many years. She is a proud Samoan woman. You think about like Linda Tinu, who is, such an icon of playing game, but is now transitioning into that coaching career, also a proud Samoan woman. So many across a lot of our game, and someone like myself who has played most of my rugby out of Wellington, I think it's around 80% of our playing base has Samoan heritage. So we have all of these players that are here. They want more. They aren't necessarily getting anywhere else. They've got NRLW, so the league that is flirting with them a bit, but so now can see that playing for their country of heritage is something not to be knocked at, but that will also get them global opportunities. And so it's very interesting to see how we're responding to that. I asked the question point blank to Alan Bunting at the beginning of the year when they named contract side, because Monica Tongawai, who is a centre for Wellington, she was named on that contracted team. Now she had her pen on paper for Samoa. And I said, is this part of the decision you are now making? Is it now part of active moves to put people in the same way that we have seen them do, New Zealand Rugby do with the men's game constantly? Are we now starting to see it as part of the factors in terms of, contract offers, that it's as much to identify, but to hold on to it? And he admitted that, that is part of those equations. So like, I'm watching her with interest. She got to play Wakan this year, and apology for swearing, but like one, and that's now kept her out for another 4 years for going over to Samoa. As a fan of the game, but I just think, Samoa, they've got all those pieces together. You only need watch any of our Whara Palmer Cup, any of our Super Rugby Opiki to see Samoan players in action. Like, they have had such an important part on the style of play that New Zealand plays. So they've been ready, it's just been a case of having to give them the opportunity of that regular game time. So I think now that we have that, it's like, when we are talking about expansion of OPIC, the most logical thing is to have a version of the Moana Pacifica franchise. They had a version of this during the preseason for Super W this year, which was Panina Pacifica team. Now, again, I don't want us to copy everything off men, but the parts that work, let's do. Because you look at the pattern that has emerged within men's World Cups. Smaller nations, I don't like to call it tier 1 and 2, right? It's emerging, established. So emerging nations like Samoa, like Fiji, like Japan, like Argentina. Argentina, they're probably further up there than, But anyway, these nations, if they get to play Super, then do better at the next World Cup. So we saw that with Japan when they used to have the Sunwolves, and then the World Cup previous, that's when the, big upset over South Africa happened. We saw this when we have had now a Moana Pacifica team operating and a Fijian Drua team playing, and we've now seen them go further in World Cups than they have previously. We sometimes make this shit more complicated than it is. Like, getting people to play regular, high-quality games is the easiest way to get teams to be better. So now that there is opportunities for Panina Pacifica, built on that in a way in that a number of the Samoan internationals actually ended up playing for the Melbourne Rebels during Super W. So they played that pre-season together and then the season proper. So they're getting to play those games. They're then getting to have that continuity of team. All of that's going to add up to excellence, because you can't tell me the Samoans aren't good at rugby. That's the least surprising thing in the world.
It's so strange, like living over here on the other side of the world. Like, I never know what rugby they're actually going to make available for me to watch. So
yeah,
FPC I watch, OPK I watch. The Super Rugby W doesn't exist as far as all my streaming platforms are concerned. It's very strange, and I'm like, I want to watch that. Anyway, I do have to ask, my USA Eagles, they didn't do so well in the WXV, but the profile for women's rugby here in the U.S. has never been bigger, thanks to our Sevens program and their success getting that bronze in the Olympics. Does a player like Alona Mar resonate on the other side of the globe? Can the success of an individual player actually mean greater success for the women's sport as a whole?
I think so. I mean, I think you only need to look at, like, it's gateway personality, right? Like, we've seen this in the US with the WNBA. Like, you had the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese phenomenon, the duality of players bringing in all of that attention. People need gateway players. At the World Cup, it was Ruby Tui, right? And then in the Football World Cup, it was Sam Kerr, And so having those people that are visible and someone to hang on to, you get interested in that, and then you stay connected to it otherwise. I think it's really interesting, the rumors we've heard recently about Lowe potentially going Gloucester Hartbury. Like, that makes complete sense for her as a player in terms of positioning herself in best thing to actually push for inclusion in your World Cup team. In terms of your game, though, I would be all over her to sign up for a WER team, because I think then you have her there. That brings
what we're all saying. It's our it's our domestic comp.
It's like the way in which it's the way in which New Zealand Rugby fumbled the bag, which was not getting Ruby Tui plugged into OPIC the year after Rugby World Cup. They gave her a sabbatical then. And it's like, okay, but we could have used her still sideline. We could have had her hosting a weekly show to get people excited about it in a way that, you could do the same thing with Lowe. Just think she needs to be attached to WER in some way. And if she is serious about leaving the jersey in a better place, that's how you do it, Mas. That's my challenge to you. If she is ever listening to me say anything, you want to make jersey better, give straight back into it. And now is the time to do it. When everyone is watching you and what you make, the moves you make, and who you deem, like where she goes, she's crowning them, right? So like crowning that move with WER, I'm so excited for what potential that league could have for you guys. And I am also very pleased personally knowing how much fucking money New Zealand Rugby has wasted 4 years trying to make your market interested in our All Blacks when they should have been sending the Black Ferns there the whole time. Like there's like, and having that interview with the organizers, I love the fact that Stacey Carone said, when you think rugby in the US, I want you to think women, because it's our game. It's like, hell yeah, it is. Like, why do we let these games be men's games and women's games? It's a women's game. You have the opportunity. There is no contact sport really, because NFL women like shit for so long. They have left that door wide open for another contact team sport to walk through, and rugby is there and has the history. Like you've got all the right pieces.
We do have women's hockey now. It's happening in my town.
Yes, yes, of course. But that's ice, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can't.
They don't call it a contact sport for some reason,
which is mad given the thing. But, yeah.
So we are actually less than a year away from the World Cup. We have our pools in place. We have our schedules. I know lots of people who have already gotten all their tickets. New Zealand, they're in a pool with Ireland, Japan, and Spain. Do you see the Black Ferns topping that pool kind of easily? I mean, you already kind of talked about it. Are Ireland going to be a permanent thorn in the Black Ferns' side now, or, was that kind of a fluke?
I think you're silly if you think anything's easy. Do you know what I mean? Like at tournaments, the only thing that is consistent with like tournaments is that anything can happen. Right?
Yeah.
Like, because if we're walking around being too confident, excuse me, if Caroline Drouin's kick had gone a little bit straighter, we would not have even been in that World Cup final. The way in which those moments happened, that New Zealand got into a final off a missed kick by France and a missed line out by England, those things never happen for those teams, and they did in such a way for us.
I will never forget it. I'm so glad we already talked about it, because I could do another hour about it right now.
Yeah. But like my point being is like you can't. The only thing that's thing is like you've got to turn up and you've got to win each week. So like you've got to be on order to go. So I think I would be very disappointed if we turned up at that Ireland game and expected anything except a tough match. And to be honest with you, same with Japan and the same with Spain.
Sure.
You let any team don't give them the respect, like you'll see what will happen. Like we can't be assuming anything's
easy.
Do you
think is that a difference with the Black Ferns in 2024/2025 where they can't take games lightly? Are we in a new stage where it's like this is no longer a foregone conclusion?
I think the reality is that when we do look at New Zealand's track record in World Cups, we actually tend to do that quite well, and that we don't once it's on, right? Like there is a expectation and a belief, right? Like I had a chat to Kelly Brazier a while ago, because she obviously, the last World Cup final that was played in England, she was playing that day. She, her and Carla Hohepa, I think, the only people that scored points for New Zealand that day. And talking to her, because that was the game where we had 2 players off. We were down to 13 at one point, still managed to win. And I was like, honestly, like, what is that? And she's like, that's just like, when we are there, it's all business. And so I'm expecting it to be the same. And again, if you look at any patterns that exist for New Zealand women's rugby over time, it's that when we come to those World Cups, it's on, it's serious. The loss to Ireland is a gift. It always is. The gift that is absolutely getting killed on the Northern Tour before a World Cup year is always the little reality check we need to make sure that we're turning up and offering everyone that respect at the tournament,
Alice Soper, you speak my language. You say the things that I'm hoping somebody's insightful enough to share with me. I've got 2 final questions for you here tonight. If in this upcoming World Cup, if England, and I think a lot of people are expecting this, if they just steamroll everybody, if none of the matches are close, is that bad for the women's game in general? If one team appears that far ahead of everyone else, does that increase or dampen fans' interest levels?
It's an interesting one, right? Were it not being played in England, I would say it's bad. Because it's being played in England, it's fantastic.
That's a great point.
To have your home nation killing it, That means that people are going to keep reporting it from day one to day whatever. It means that there's going to be an energy and an excitement attached to that team that is going to be fantastic, right? We've already seen these pre-sales, which are like, 87% of the total sales of last World Cup, right?
Yep.
That energy is only going to continue to build if England does well. So England being favourites in a home World Cup, that's going to be great. Is England steamrolling going to be good for England? Nah. I think they will get too cocky. They always do. They did last World Cup.
They're
like,
kind of right on the edge right now.
They told everyone, 29 games on the trot or whatever it was before the final. It's like, who cares, man? Like, honestly, nobody cares when it comes to a final. Like, in the same way that I'm saying, New Zealand can't turn up and
doing
think
things
that...
to make us root against them is like, okay. I was already doing good at that.
I'm really, the game I'm really excited about in the World Cup pools is like that Australia England game. I just feel like Australia has the potential. Like, having seen what they did to France, the first WXV, like they have the potential to do something just mad. And the thing is with England, if they haven't been pushed, it's the head game of it, right? Like I always know this as like from my own playing experience. My favorite game that we would get to play each year is the one that we like almost lost and had to sign back for. Because if you do that once in a season, you are like you have that hole that you can go into to climb back out, and that's the like difference between New Zealand, right? Like when we have played finals, quite often halftime we're down. Like the last 2 World Cup finals, halftime we were down. Doesn't mean anything though.
That's a stat I've become really interested in recently. Teams that are behind at halftime and then win in the end and do it consistently. I'm starting to think. I think the stats are pointing to something that we haven't seen before. That's an indication of a really strong team.
Well, ultimately, it's the head game of it all, right? And when it comes down to World Cups, it is the old like cliche of like the top 2 inches being your brain is what will carry you through, and that's what's going to be interesting in terms of when we finally land on our Black Ferns team. How much experience do we have in that mindset? Because at the moment, it's not as deep, right? We have had some of those anchors that moved on, like a Portia Woodman, for example, Renee Wycliffe, that they're at Kendra Coxedge. A number of these players that have played that game a million times are no longer there. So do we have that same grit in this younger player group? Are the older heads like Ruahei Demont able to instill that confidence in them? That's what will be interesting to see as they travel through. They don't have an easy path, whatever way they walk down, because if they are lucky to get out of the pools, they are lucky to get past quarters, they're looking at either most likely Canada or England in a semi-final. Don't tell me either of those are easy. Like, to be honest with you, as much as I will always love my Black Ferns and everything, I'm so excited about Canadian rugby right now. I would love to see them go through.
It's as if you're staring at my screen right now. Because my final question... I was lucky enough to chat with Philippa Tuttiett a while back, and we talked about Canada and how good they are, despite not having gone fully professional. So my sort of glass half empty thought was, if they're this good anyway, the powers that be are going to say, why should we throw money at that? They're fine. And her glass half full thought was, I mean, if they look this good without money, imagine how good they'll be with it, which is an incentive for people to invest. What is your take on Canada? They're so good. They're so fun. They're such a great story. Tell me about Canada right now.
I think the thing that excites me the most about Canada is they're doing it their way. And that's what I love. They're doing it their way, not just for Canadian rugby, but for Canadian women's rugby. And that they're not doing any of the things that you're supposed to. At the moment, we're seeing all the other nations.
Well, if they can keep as far away from Canadian men's rugby as possible, that's probably a good idea.
But, in terms of moves people are making, we're seeing everybody kind of copy each other. Like, one one union will go professional for their top tier, then the next one will launch their league, then the next one will domestically. They're all doing this, whereas Canada is sitting there and going, we will never have the resource that we need to compete, so what do we do differently? Like, how do we get outcomes without resource? And like, what I really enjoy about them is that they are taking that thing that I think many of us actually mean when we're talking about professionalism, which is like, professionalism doesn't just mean a paycheck, it's actually a program. And so like the core investments that that Canada Rugby has made. What is the first thing they paid and paid well? Their coach. Then they pay for a second coach. Then they pay for S&C. Then they pay for doctor. Like, they are putting that environment and they're making that as, you know, high operating as they can. They're saying we have a player pool that these are our elite athletes. They'll play sevens, they'll play 15s, they'll play whatever, because it's getting them game time. You know, they're having that movement across, then those rigid boundaries between, because we know one thing we know about women's rugby at like players, our athletes, is we can actually very confidently switch between the two formats, more so than I think they can in the men's game. So you have that, but also they're looking around and they're taking advantage. Because they don't have the resource, they're taking advantage of those that do. You look at the way that they have infiltrated the PWR, and that so many of their players now operating within that. And so they're like, we don't have the money to run a league here. Let's not waste time doing that. Let's support our players to go and play in their top team. And then, you know, the expense for us is pulling them from there into our camps. They are also, though, I'm sure Canadian rugby will be paying close attention to what the States do, because not dissimilar to that relationship, that symbiotic relationship that New Zealand has with Australia, and that I would love, the more Australia rugby develops, the better we are going to be. The more that US develops, the better Canada will be. And that, you know, we've already seen this in other good offerings. You know, you spoke about the hockey before. They're the prime example, right, of having both a Canadian and American domestic league. That is the path forward for WER, right? Like, you have to think the most logical expansion points are 2 franchises out of Canada. And if you do that, then all of a sudden we've got a whole different beast that can operate, you know, and that starts to become really exciting. So I think I love Canadian rugby because, like I say, they're doing it differently, and they're doing it well, and they're doing it confidently differently. They're not making any excuses for it. And there's so much that comes from professionalism that actually hasn't seen any other nation do right. We talk about professionalism in the women's game. That only means those pulling on the international jersey. Every layer beneath is still amateur. And I don't think that that's how you use like paychecks properly. The fundamental difference between they launched like Super Rugby here in New Zealand for men versus women, in year 1, men were all professional, even if they were the shittest bloke on their roster. That was their full-time job. We don't have that here. Unless you're playing for New Zealand, you are not a full-time rugby player. And so we don't have that big incubator to the machine. And so really none of us have it. We talk about us being pro. Yeah, 30 people are. So does it matter? Like 30 pro versus 0, but actually just a coach neutral benefit? Like, I don't know. I don't know if 30 contracts is enough.
Right.
Yeah.
The Canada story is so great, though. Like, isn't it? They're such a great team. They're so much fun to watch. You know, the fact that they hung with England so close in the WXV.
Oh, they should have won.
And if Bookable was there, was that a win?
Oh, if Sophie de Goody was, I mean, they've done all of this year without the best player.
Right.
And that's, I think, the story about Canadian rugby right now. Like, okay, so we're talking about 30 players. They have actually developed their roster during this period, which has been fantastic to watch. You look at someone like Julia Schell, right, who's their only got pulled in at Pack 4 because of an injury to, is it LaChance, I think is her name? She got injured the game before the Black Ferns match. So she was chucked in the starting and didn't miss a beat, right? You know, so they are having not just like, it's that whole thing of they're actually growing a really good core Canadian rugby now. They have got depth at every position. And I actually think they have that better than any other team. Wow. Because if you look at an England roster, yeah, Ellie Caldan's amazing. Who's your next one? Are they as good?
That's a great point. It's a bit of a drop off.
You know, and it's the same for New Zealand at the moment. Our starting can be fantastic. Is our bench strong enough? And what do we know about tournaments? It's like, you know, it's all the cliches, but like bench wins, man. Like it's that depth that you need, because as a tournament goes on and the injury happens that you weren't expecting, do you have the player to call on? And that's why I'm like, Canada, you excite me.
So after the Olympics, it felt, where I am, like there was a massive wave of enthusiasm for women's rugby. Did you feel that over there? And do you think that's happening, or did it just? My fear was we had this tiny little window of enthusiasm and it was going to dissipate. Where do you think it landed? Is the women's state the women's game in a better state than it was last time when you and I talked?
Well, yes, because now we're talking about more teams. right? Like last time we talk about England, we talk about New Zealand, we maybe talk about France. Now we're talking at length about Canada. We're talking about the potential that USA has. We're talking about the development that Australia has had, that Samoa has had. All of this, WXV still remains the best thing that we have done. And why is it the best thing that we have done? Because it was something that was designed for us. It was something that never existed in men's rugby, that they looked across our needs and they developed it for us. So if Canada Rugby teaches us anything, if UX teaches us anything, it's design programs for us. Don't copy and paste.
And the WXV has a year to think about it. They intentionally built in this off year where they're going to say, okay, let's look at what we did and how it went while the World Cup's happening. What's your top list of things that they should maybe tweak to make it better? How does the WXV come back even stronger after the 2025 World Cup?
Could we put it all in one place? Like all the tiers? I know then it's like a World Cup, but like, could you not do that?
It's good that, so should the host nation have a country in the competition? That seems unfair if we're trying to. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, that's the best way to do it." Like South Africa hosting was great, so we should do that. I'm like, but I don't know if I want that. What's the answer there?
I hear what you're saying. I like it because I think when unions are smart, they're building things off it. So again, you saw that in South Africa, right? Like they had that what ran alongside their hosting of WXV2 was they had like an under-20s national tournament that then elected a South African under-20s team that then played neighboring African teams. Like that's great. Like use that energy and that and the emphasis to be building larger. And I think that's, when I see it work best is like when we're not just thinking about the tournaments itself, but like the halo that we've got the core and the impact that each of these things can have. So like, I don't know, when I'm saying to you, can we have it all in one place? I only say that because like then we have more of it's easy to cover. Because let's be honest, David, like you and I, like I've got one time zone for one, another for another, another for another. Like that makes it really hard if I'm actually trying to talk about the thing. So like having it in like, if not the same place within the same time zone would be like really useful for me in terms of coverage and engagement as a fan.
I can't believe I never even thought of that. That's a great point.
So like that type of thing, I think I am desperate for us to hold on to a version of this though. I think it has all the things that we've already seen it. Like we've already seen proof of the product, which is like between 1 and year 2 of the rugby itself. I think the conversation about attendance, about broadcasting, about fans is actually a separate one to have. And when you hold on to the core, which is like a good development rugby progress, because that's actually what this was designed for, was to design to uplift the quality of rugby. It wasn't designed to bring all of the fans in. If we want to then have a think about how we can do that, there is a number of conversations. But I think we are blaming a global tournament for domestic problems. Like there is a reason that England has been getting fantastic crowds along, because that's been like a 10-year project that they have intentionally built local communities that will then turn out for things, right? And they did that by copying France. And so like there is patterns and things that then we can look at encouraging other nations to do to then build that into such a place. But we cannot blame the global tournament for domestic missteps. Like I don't think that is fair for us to hold it up. And I also want to challenge that, because I think maybe we need to look at our metrics different for women's rugby, and that like we're coming of age in a time where like broadcast actually rules, not physical turning up. We've seen an ultimate decline in like men turning up to games like domestically and things here. And that's a lot to do, like we have fully reorientate ourselves while professionalism has been that like the biggest, random men on the internet will always tell me bums on seats. It hasn't been bums on seats to pay for teams since 1996. It's been eyes on screen. And so are we instead looking at the metrics around that? Tell me what the viewership is year on year. Tell me how many people streamed this. Tell me how many people engaged with this. Do we think about that differently in terms of where we play it? I would be a big fan of small stadiums and bigger global viewership opportunities. Like let's just rethink on how we're doing it.
Yeah. Whenever if the size of the stadium matches the size of the crowd, it's just the best for the match. It's the best for the atmosphere. That's a great point. I'd never even thought of that.
And that's also how we build things that people want to go to. You have to be able to miss out. Like you look at the success, which has been how England has grown its domestic audience, and that is essentially moving it out of Twickenham to then move it back when it's ready. Like they made that big call in 2010 that said we're not playing the final at Twickenham, we're playing it at the Stoop. And at
I think
the
you mean
time,
Allianz London.
oh yes, yeah, that they
I'm
were
never
like
going to stop saying that.
that was like a big thing at the time for them to like step away from the big stage and step into like the shadow of it. But the reality is now they've been able to build that to stand in its own mana. I just think, we don't have to trick people into falling in love with our thing. We just have to keep investing like into the product, realizing that we're still in a startup phase in terms of audience building, and scale it accordingly. Don't try and be the men's game already. They 100-year start. We'll get there in 20, but just start smaller to grow big.
Alice Soper, you are one of my favorite people on earth. I asked you for an hour. You've already given me more than that. And of course, now all I can think of is the 47 other podcasts I want to have to talk to you about all the subsequent things that we just kind of touched upon here. It's just magical every time I get to talk to you. I really appreciate your time. I thank you so much. Any last thoughts? What's coming up for the Alice's Soapbox? What are your predictions for the oncoming months?
Yeah, good question. I think I'm really interested to see these remaining spots that are still to be filled in the rosters. Who are going to be those three the Chiefs pick up? Who's going to be the one that the Hurricanes Poa pick up? Are any of them going to be the Sevens names that we know have to play Picky in order to play World Cup? So
the
is
Poa,
Stacey Walker coming?
They're going to get more
Sarah
than
Hiddeny. Like, are they coming back? Question mark. Are they coming into those rosters? That's the thing to watch for me, because if they're not in these rosters, now we're looking at a different team coming into that World Cup. We don't have the Sevens reinforcements really. So that's now going to be a real test on where our 15s programming is at in this country. And is it going to be good enough? We'll have to wait. And see.
The POA, I think it is, they had one win last year. You've got to do better this coming year, right? Wellington's got to be better.
We'll see. Hey, we'll see. And we won the one that counts. So I always like beating Matatu at home. So, we'll have fun. It'll be great to see Cassie in the boot at 10. I think her choice, selection there is really interesting, and the signal that it sends to young Samoan players in this country and in this part of the world, and that her pathway to that team wasn't the one I laid out to you in terms of you play club, you play this, you then try and play Black Ferns. No, she's gone sideways all the way through that, which is just giving, evidence to the options that women now have. She started in playing in Canterbury. She moved to Tasman because she wasn't getting the game time there. She played out of Tasman. She then played for Samoa. She then went over and played in the Super W. She's then continued to play for Samoa and now has picked up a Super Opiki contract. Like, this is an interesting path in that it's different and it's moving to where those opportunities are. So if you're a young woman in Wellington, having a Samoan international, such a figurehead of that team right now, people will be watching. And that is going to be really exciting as well in terms of that recruitment that can happen for, Samoan women's rugby.
Alice Soper, you are the absolute best. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Scrum of the Earth. Let's find a time again soon. It's so tough. The crazy time difference is always like, even in the hour beforehand, I'm like, wait, did I send the right link? Is it the right time? Where am I? Like, it's so strange. But I can't tell you how much it means to me.
I have a time zone tab in my permanently on my tabs because all trying to figure out everyone else in the other parts of the world. But such a pleasure, David. I appreciate your passion and your questions, my friend. You asked me more interesting ones than most.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Alice, so much. I'll be keeping up on your newsletter. I'm so glad to talk to you again. And to everyone listening and watching across the globe, cheers. Talk to you soon. And be well.
It gives me great pleasure to be here today.
Oh, it does, Nate.
You want to
tempt the wrath of the whatever from high atop the thing?
Alice, you're the best. I really appreciate that.
Hey, so happy to, yeah, like I say, happy to talk. It's a very interesting time. Everything's moving and moving so quickly as it always does at the moment.
It's been so fun. My little, it's been a 3-year journey of my doing this show, and like I feel like I've gotten better at being an interviewer. And you have to know ahead of time, like if you were somebody else, I might have needed 6 pages, and with you, I needed 2.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm looking for too, because it's your insight that I just value so much, and it was just love it so much.
I understand what you mean. It's the whole fuck your question, here's my answer. This is what I want to talk about. I'm a terrible one for that. I will repurpose any question to get to what I want to talk about.
In one of my early interviews, I asked somebody, I expected him to, respond, and instead his answers were like, yes.
Oh,
no. And I was
so
like,
hard.
I have you on the show because you're supposed to be interesting.
It's so hard when people like won't go out of the first gear, or just like when people actually need you to ask a